Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining me as we spend the next hour together. I am hoping that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family because you matter. My opening observation tonight, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Those were the words spoken by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who also went on to say, in terms of justice, no, we are not satisfied and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. When it comes to understanding justice in America, as one attorney put it, the attorney Ben Crump, who stated there are two justice systems in America, one for whites, one for blacks. Well, then one has to question what's happening to our foundation in this country. The fact of the matter is that talk about justice is cheap. All houses you see are built upon foundations that support and hold the weight of everything. Our nation is founded on the foundation of one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The moral compass of our personality in America should bend towards justice. Based on Scripture, we are commanded to do justice. And the question that looms large in the wake of the grand jury in Louisville, Kentucky, in the Breonna Taylor case, calls into question if that foundational principle of justice for all has been served. I'll leave that for you to decide. And those are my opening observations. Joining me now on the program is Councilmember Jessica Green from the city of Louisville. In 2019, I should point out that she became vice chair of the Majority Caucus there. And in 2020, this year, she serves as chair of the Metro Council's Public Safety Committee and as a member of the Committee Affairs, Health and Education Committee. Jessica, thank you for joining us today. And my first statement to you is that I'm brokenhearted and sad in terms of what's happened in your city in the wake of the unfortunate death of Breonna Taylor, and certainly now on the heels of the unrest that's been unfolding in your city since the announcement yesterday of the grand jury and the statement from the Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron. Let's start there. This grand jury, when it rendered its findings and then the initial statement from Daniel Cameron, what's your response to that?
I was hurt. I was angry. I was devastated. And just the pit in the bottom of my stomach dropped out. And it was a rough night in Louisville last night, and trying to figure out how we pick the pieces back up to even move forward at this point.
The tension that we have seen in Louisville for the past 5-6 months since Breonna's death, there was no release valve yesterday from the grand jury to allow people to feel that a sense of justice was taking place for the Breonna Taylor family, as well as for neighbors, people living in Louisville. And it resulted in unrest and 2 police officers being shot. Your reaction to that, seeing that unfold in your city, a city that you've grown up in and know so well and love so well?
Well, there has been very much an us versus them kind of line drawn in the sand. It has not helped that in the recent days that police officers have released statements. One of the officers was actually involved in this incident, and there was one of the officers facing potential indictment in this case, released a statement to the entire department saying, we did the legal and moral thing, guys, so keep up the good work. We had another major release statements to her platoon individuals, essentially calling protesters less than, and that they would be working, pumping their gas and at McDonald's later on. So this is the environment that we are living in. I would have never thought that we would have gotten here. I've lived in Louisville my entire life, raised my family here. It is a wonderful place to be. But right now we are really at ground zero in this country, and the entire world is watching what has unfolded here and what has occurred in the last 5 months. But it's a very troubling atmosphere right now.
Yeah, and a lot of people are looking at this troubling atmosphere. How do you to stop the violence from escalating with those two police officers shot? And certainly our prayers go out to them that they would recover from
Absolutely.
their gunshot wounds, but also that the city itself would find some healing. How do you do that right now?
Well, the reality is that this was not an overnight kind of process to how we got here. So I don't think that there, unfortunately, is going to be a switch that we can flip, that we can fix everything immediately overnight. What I will say is that there are some systemic issues that we've really got to get to the root of. I think that one of the things that would be very helpful is that if the Attorney General would release the transcripts or the recordings of what was actually presented to the grand jury, because for people who do not know, the grand jury process is 100% controlled by the prosecutors in the matter. The prosecutor presents whatever evidence it is that they want to present to him. It's a very one-sided process, which is why around 98 to 99% of cases presented to the grand jury actually result in an indictment. And so in my experience as a prosecutor, I was a prosecutor for almost 10 years. I never saw a grand jury proceeding last longer than 10 minutes. This grand jury proceeding occurred over several days, multiple days. What was it that they heard? Especially when we understand that Kenneth Walker, the boyfriend of Breonna Taylor's, his presentation to the grand jury took 3 minutes. 3 minutes. But the officers' grand jury presentations took multiple days. Why? Why was this grand jury proceeding conducted in such a different way than the typical grand jury proceedings are? And so the first thing that we want to know is, what is there? So the thing is, people are not stupid. They can handle information. But when you do not present information to people, there is the feeling that you're hiding something. So again, I would be very curious as to what was presented. I can almost guarantee that the AG's office, they brought up the issue of self-defense, which again, if anybody knew anything about Kentucky law, it's not applicable. But again, typically the defendant is left to raise issues of self-defense at a trial. That's for them to do. That's not for the prosecutor to tell the grand jury, hey guys, there might be issues here, so let's not even go there. Why did that occur in this case? And so many unanswered questions. So the very first thing that I think needs to happen here is that those grand jury proceedings, the recordings, the transcripts need to be released. And so much of this process has been clouded in darkness and in secrecy. And that's part of why people are very, very frustrated. And so moving forward, we really need to make sure that everything is transparent. And so I do think that that is at least a start.
A start indeed, to have some transparency there and to shed some light over the darkness and remove that veil. I'm talking to Jessica Green. She is a council member of Louisville, Kentucky. She's also an attorney, former prosecutor, and we'll be back with more to talk more about this case and how it's impacting her city, a city she loves, a city that is near and dear to her, and a city that right now seems to be erupting into more violence and more anger. And certainly we want to stop that, but also address the systemic issues that have led to this in the first place. Back with more Jessica Green after this. Welcome back to the program. So we're talking about Breonna Taylor and the case that's followed with the grand jury and its findings, wanton endangerment for one of 3 police officers. And I'm talking to council member Jessica Green of Louisville, Kentucky. As a former prosecutor, do you find that just the wanton endangerment charge against Brett Hankinson and no charges against Detective Cosgrove and Officer Mattingly, that nothing went towards them?
Mm-hmm. What is very difficult for lay people and even professionally, legally trained minds is to understand if the behavior of at least Hankinson was wanton in relation to the three white neighbors, and I just got to call it what it is,
Right.
the three white neighbors who had gunshots inside of their home. For whatever reason, the black neighbor upstairs who had gunshots in their home, an indictment was not brought for that individual. But if the behavior was wanton because bullets went into a white person's home, and that person was not injured, why in the world would the behavior at least not be wanton when a woman was murdered and bled out, an innocent woman? And so part of what General Cameron talked about was a self-defense claim. And again, I've said it before, he either is adamantly disregarding the current status of the law, or he just doesn't care about the law. You can't levy a self-defense claim against me if I was not the person who actually brought the initial deadly force towards you. And so there has never been a claim at any time that Breonna Taylor was ever armed, that she ever harmed an officer, that she shot outside the door. And so because of that, the idea that they even bring up the idea of self-defense is utterly and absolutely ridiculous. The fact that they could not verify, and that they did not verify who made that shot before they fired back, that behavior is the essence of wanton behavior. And in order, again, to be able to ascertain and be able to say, okay, listen, this is self-defense, you got to at least know where the threat is coming from. They didn't. It was not from Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor is dead. They did not defend themselves against Breonna Taylor. So this idea that you are defending yourself against an unarmed, legal, law-abiding woman in her home who is now dead, and that you now have the audacity to publicly say that, oh, it was self-defense, it is absolutely sickening. The fact that he could even say that with a straight face, it disgusts me even more than I already was when I think about it.
What actions or steps can you take to try to bring some remedy to this situation, to get the justice that Breonna Taylor's family is seeking?
Yeah.
Keeping
Well, that is why elections are so important. And sometimes people don't pay attention to elections on the off years that are not presidential years, but prosecutors have an extreme amount of leeway and liberty and discretion. There is nobody else who can bring the charges at this point. The community doesn't have the ability to indict these officers. Only our Attorney General will have the ability to do that. And he has made the decision to do that, I believe, for a variety of political reasons. You know, this process should not have been muddied by political waters. However, during this time frame, as citizens have sat and waited, he's been out frolicking at Republican National conventions, which immediately polarizes this and turns this into a political issue instead of just trying to do what is right. And so this falls squarely on the back of our Attorney General, and I'm committing to doing everything that I can to make sure that he's not reelected.
We'll be back with more after this. And you'll recall that the President of the United States last night, in referencing the case of Breonna Taylor, directly stated that he considered that Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General of your state of Kentucky, was a star.
Really brilliant Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron is doing a fantastic job. I think he's a star. And he made a statement that I'll just read. Justice is not often easy. It does not fit the mold of public opinion, and it does not conform to shifting standards. It answers only to the facts and to the law. If we simply act on emotion or outrage, there's no justice. Mob justice is not justice. Justice sought by violence is not justice. It just becomes revenge. I mean, I heard that. I said, write that down for me, please, because I think it was a terrific statement. He's handling it very well. You know who he is, right? I think you know. I think everyone now knows who he is.
Well, he did, and he also it mentioned his name on a list of potential Supreme Court nominees, which is another ridiculous issue when the man has never even tried even a traffic ticket kind of case, and that we have a president who would even publicly say that he would consider him to be a Supreme Court justice. And so that, again, this is the type of background that this individual comes from. He's a Trump, McConnell Republican, and in my mind, we know everything that Trump and McConnell think about minority communities. And again, Daniel Cameron, they used him, and he did their bidding.
Jessica, talk to me about Breonna Taylor, her family, and the fact that they see this as a step in the wrong direction, and yet they're making an appeal to people to peacefully protest. They're not going to get Breonna Taylor back, and at the same time, they what was their reaction to the fact that this attorney general basically didn't talk about Breonna Taylor at all with the grand jury?
Devastated. And I've spoken with the attorney for the family since yesterday. The attorney general met with them at 1:15 p.m. yesterday. This was the same time that the results of the grand jury proceedings were being announced by the judge. So these happened simultaneously. So he didn't even have enough courtesy to meet with these folks, the day before, heck, even an hour before. They found out the results of the indictment at the exact same time that everybody else around the world was finding out, which is, when I think about something that is low down, that is one of the most just egregious things that I can ever even think about. They found out when the world was finding out. They also were not told at the time by General Cameron that those 3 wanton endangerment charges had nothing at all to do with Breonna Taylor. Their attorney had to tell them that. And so he didn't even have the chutzpah to fully explain, okay, well, one of them is being indicted on 3 counts, but guess what? It has nothing at all to do with your child, the one that the world has rallied around. And so they're devastated, understandably so. I'm sure angry. We in Louisville, we have adopted Breonna Taylor as everybody's little sister, everybody's cousin. And so I know that if I was sitting there feeling hurt and shedding tears when the announcement was made, I can only imagine how Tamika Palmer, Breonna's mother, how her baby sister, Janiyah, are feeling. This is a close-knit family. The loss of Breonna Taylor to them is palpable. And while we around the world have used her as a rallying cry, she was theirs.
Yeah.
She was their daughter. She was their sister. She was their beloved. And while the country will never be the same, these people, their lives, their trajectory, everything, they will never, ever be the same.
My thanks to City Council Member Jessica Green. When we return, we'll be talking to attorneys Mark Harris and Timothy Allen Simon about the Breonna Taylor case. Welcome back to the program. So joining me once again is my West Coast connection. I love these guys, Timothy Allen Simon and Mark Harris. Both of them are attorneys. And of course, Timothy Allen Simon owns TAS Strategies. He's also the chairman of the board of directors for the California Black Chamber of Commerce. And Mark is a partner with the Ben Crump law firm. And Mark, I want to begin with you because we've seen your colleague, Ben Crump, address the nation through various media outlets about the injustice that has been rendered from this grand jury and the Attorney General of Kentucky. And he says no justice has been given to the Breonna Taylor family at all. What's your colleague, Ben Crump, stating to you personally about this?
It's first, thank you for having me on the show again, Kelly. I'm so proud of Ben Crump, again, the Thurgood Marshall of our generation. Some call him the Attorney General for Black America. One of the things he said that's so disturbing is just following the elements of what's happened here. Timothy Simon, Commissioner Simon, and I as attorneys have been taught to do what's known as linear thinking. As an attorney, you're trained to think on a linear basis, 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. What he said was this. He said, number one, the information that was posed and put forward to get the no-knock warrant in the first place was fallacious and missing key elements of probable cause. So that was a problem. And some of us have opined that that's probably what led the city to the decision to pay the $12 million. They knew they were wrong. So you have a bad no-knock warrant, but you have a no-knock warrant. The officers go to serve the warrant. It's disingenuous to think that they would have the permission not to knock, but of course they knocked and identified themselves. That didn't even make sense. So you have that going on. You have the shots that were fired, 6 of which entered Breonna Taylor's body, only 1 of which said the Attorney General Cameron killed her. So it absolutely diminished the other 5. There were 6 bullets that entered her body. The only folks who were with their rights protected were the white neighbors who had bullets enter their apartment rather than Breonna Taylor's body that had 6 bullets enter her body. This is just wrong on top of wrong. And what Attorney Crump keeps trying to get America to see is that we really do have 2 separate and unequal forms of justice in the United States of America.
Yes, that would be the case, as we've seen in the Breonna Taylor case and so many other cases prior to that, where justice has not been served. Timothy Allen Simon, bringing you in now. The impact of all of this and what we expected the reaction to be would be one of people protesting in the streets, most of them peacefully done throughout other cities in America. But right there in the heart of Louisville, 2 police officers shot last night on the heels of these findings from the grand jury. We can't tolerate violence in any form. Tell me your response to what we saw there in Louisville, and how do we move forward so that we have peaceful protests in order to get to a place called justice?
Well, first, my prayers to the officers and their families. I understand that they are recovering and that a suspect has been apprehended and charged. So it appears that there's been swift movement in that element or regard. This is tragic but predictable. I hate to say that, but it's tragic and predictable. There have been firearms on the scene amongst protesters since the protesters began. And, you know, if you bring guns to a fight, you're probably going to use them which is, you know, unfortunate and tragic. And I think these states that allow open carry have to evaluate what are the consequences of that type of policy. But the protest, for the most part, have been peaceful. And there has been fires, you know, started on the streets and other matters that, you know, are sort of collateral. It happens. Those are the bad actors, I'd like to say. But for the most part, the protests have been peaceful, and I think they're doing their best to honor the name and the memory of Breonna Taylor. As Attorney Harris mentioned, there's a lot of suspicion regarding the circumstances that led up to the warrant. I understand that the federal government, the U.S. Attorney's Office, is conducting that investigation. I would say, based upon what we've experienced both with Attorney General William Barr and his predecessor, Jeff Sessions, you know, there clearly needs to be a change in leadership in the Justice Department. And the only way we can initiate that change is by a strong get out to vote on November 3rd to put in a new administration that can put the civil rights back in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department.
Coming back with more after this. There is a report that's out that states that the cost of racism in America, here in the United States, U.S. economy lost $16 trillion because of discrimination. Tell me about that, what your reaction is to that kind of scenario. And it's coming from a bank here in the United States stating that they've examined it and they find that discrimination against African Americans has resulted in a $16 trillion loss to our economy. Mark, you're an economist. Talk to me about it.
You know, my former colleague when I was an investment banker is Ray McGuire. Raymond McGuire is the vice chair of Citigroup, one of the most esteemed financial institutions in the country. He is an undeclared candidate for mayor of New York City. He and I were on the National Association of Securities Professionals board together. I've known him for years. Ray is the one who led the authorship of that report, $16 trillion, 13 trillion of which is attributable to lost money that the African American community should have accessed for business loans and for economic empowerment. Another $1.5 to $2 trillion is attributable to other resources that should have been available to the African American community, particularly in housing, that was lost to our community. There have been report after report after report that say that African American homes are appraised at lesser values than Caucasian homes. The third area that he pointed out was the significant loss of potential revenue from something that's extremely important, and that is a lack of access to higher education. We all know that the higher your platform is in terms of your academic preparation, the higher potential you have for wealth and income moving forward. And then finally, the disparities employee to employee, two equally qualified employees, one Caucasian, one African American. We all know the African American tends to be paid less for exactly the same work. So it's not shocking, but it's disappointing. And it's why myself and others support Proposition 16 in California, which is to reinstate affirmative action in our state. I hope it passes, and that's what the report pointed out, the need for things like Proposition 16 to bring about equity before we really talk about equality.
Timothy, I want you to weigh in on this because you served there in the state of California, the fifth largest economy in the world. You worked directly with then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, Republican governor. At that time, you were serving within the Republican Party. How do you see this this incredible report about $16 trillion lost, and blaming it and laying it squarely on the basis of discrimination in our country towards African Americans?
Our administration, the Schwarzenegger administration, really pushed for greater inclusion of African Americans and other minorities. In fact, if I recall correctly, Attorney Harris was one of our appointees. And that, you know, the ability to make decisions that allocate resources is critical, not only to communities that have been historically shut out of decisions, but it also improves economic growth and development. That's why it's so bothersome to me. And I've been in the diversity and inclusion space for a long time. As you know, I chair a state chamber that, you know, so many don't understand that those barriers and racism that you employ actually hurts the greater good. And then we can have stronger economic growth, stronger GDP when you're creating more consumers, when you're putting monies in the pockets of people to buy the goods and services that support the economy. Unfortunately, too much attention has been placed on the trickle down, the belief that by helping the wealthy, I create jobs. And that economic, as George Herbert Bush called it, that voodoo economic theorem, just has proven to create greater wealth disparity. So I'm not shocked by the results of the report, and I'm hoping that it'll finally get into the C-suites and the boardrooms where people can understand that I'm losing money because of my bias, my racism. It's time for me to find ways to turn that around.
Gentlemen, I got to go. I got to leave it there. Appreciate you as always. Can never get enough of my West Coast connection. Timothy Allen Simon, Mark Harris, attorneys, doing their thing and helping America at the same time. Thank you. And
thank you for your kind words, Mark, also. Thank you.
Oh, it's true. Thank you, Timothy. Right. Thank you, Kelly.
We'll be back with more after this. And welcome back. Joining me now are two political commentators, Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver, as well as Erica Savage Wilson. Erica, by the way, has the Savage Political Podcast. Make sure you check her out. And Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver has a remarkable book about exceptional Black women. And certainly, ladies, you're on today because I consider both of you to be exceptional Black women, setting the standard of how African American women think, act, and lead. in our country, and I appreciate your service to this country. Well, I'll just say it. I'm heartbroken with the outcome of Breonna Taylor. I know that crosses the line for some people, but I'm a Black man who has a daughter and two sons, and to see the kind of injustice that's been dealt out. I just got to ask you, what's your reaction to the Breonna Taylor situation?
I guess I'll start off like you, Kelly. I'm heartbroken. I was talking about this last night, and to me, it feels like, if you were a kid and you ever got the wind knocked out of you,
Yeah.
that's how I felt. It hurts. It is a scary moment. It is a very vulnerable position that we all feel in as Black people, as Black women, as people who love Black women. This is a very sad and, quite frankly, also to me, angering moment. I'm mad as hell. Not only because no charges were brought against any of the officers responsible for riddling her body with 5 bullets and then just leaving her on her floor to die without even rendering aid in order to try to save her life. I'm also mad because of the utter disrespect that was given to her and her family in terms of how this charade yesterday was carried out. The fact that the Attorney General would think, yes, let's have some sort of endangerment charge for the police officer who didn't even shoot Breonna. He was outside shooting up in the patio, and he endangered her neighbors. So let's bring a charge about that. But those people who actually did shoot and kill this essential worker that was working every day to save lives during a pandemic, it is just infuriating to me. And it once again shows why this common refrain of Black Lives Matter is such a resonant one among millions of people. Because when things like this happen over and over again, it certainly gives the connotation that to far too many police who get away with murder in this nation, Black lives just don't matter at all.
Erica, what's your response?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Avis. And, we're all parents here. And so one of the things that I thought about is just thinking about Breonna as a baby, that was a child that 2 parents brought into the world, that they watched grow up. That's somebody's little girl. And so when we think about broadly Black Lives Matter continuing to carry that message forward we've had to do that for hundreds of years, just thinking about this, pausing and thinking about one life that was taken away, somebody's child, somebody's baby. And then when we move on from that, we think about then again how this really diminishes the value again of Black life. We saw it played out on television, on a Zoom call. The whole globe saw this, where we're listening to these charges, so to speak. We're listening to what in actuality this police officer is going to be indicted for, and their initials. And it was brought forward in a lot of commentary on yesterday that we didn't hear the initials BT. And I think that was kind of a thought that was said out loud, because a lot of us, as we sat and we listened, we didn't hear those initials. So again, it really shows largely how this world continues to say that Black life does not matter.
We'll continue our discussion. We're coming back after a break to continue our dialogue with Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver and Erica Savage Wilson right after the break. And welcome back. So I'm joined by Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver and Erica Savage Wilson, and we're talking about the Breonna Taylor case. Both of you are professional women who deal with politics, and you deal with life as it revolves around politics. You also deal with the racial issues and the unrest that we're all witnessing right now in this country since the death of George Floyd, and the list goes on. You're also mothers. And when you talk to your children about Breonna Taylor, about George Floyd, about Rayshard Brooks and Daniel Prude and Jacob Blake, I mean, it's so taxing on our psyche. What do you do to keep yourselves motivated in order to encourage and inspire your children?
This is the extra burden that Black parents bear and have borne since we were kidnapped and brought to this nation. We have always known that our children were imperiled. That is just an extra burden that we have always bared. We've always known that our children could be killed, and there's nothing that we could do in that child's last moments to comfort them or to come to save them. We've always had this unique level of vulnerability to American violence. And as Black parents, it is a taxing thing for us emotionally because we're trying to protect and prepare our children as best we can, knowing that our power to actually do that adequately is stifled, is insufficient, okay? And so for me, what it has looked like over the years as the mother of two Black sons who also understand the importance of protecting their female cousin, right, is this issue of just understanding the lay of the land in which the world that they navigate. You know, for example, all of us have had the talk with our children.
Yeah.
And we all know what that means as Black people. But I also want my children to know, because one of them is of voting age, that we just can't sit back and expect this country to act right. Every shift that this nation has made over the years to get a little bit better, it has been pulled in that direction, largely by us as Black people. We have done the lion's work of making this country more close to the more perfect union that it was originally envisioned to be. It is our blood, it is our sweat, it is our tears, it is our activism, it is our voting power that has at least moved the needle in the right direction over the years. And what I try to do is I try to tell my children that in moments like this, it is frustrating, it is angering, it could be discouraging if we let ourselves be discouraged. But what I suggest is that this is not a moment to give up. When we give up, they win. This is the moment to straighten our backs and fight harder.
Erica, your reaction or your response as a mother of children and as a Black woman and as someone who's concerned about what we're seeing out here in the streets of America and the consciousness and ideology conflict in America?
Sure. And I agree with everything Dr. Avis said, and even thinking about just the honesty with which Black parents have to speak to their Black children, that the conversation that I've had with my son over the years, the conversations that we're having now, it's been really kind of a continuation, right? So he's been a part of a lot of action items. So there's this understanding. A part of the talk that I had with him wasn't that he had to be 10 times better, but in fact, the expectation would be that because there's so many failings all around him. And so the conversations that we're able to have now, he's able to share with me and tell me things and then be able to vent in frustration around how this country seems not to be moving in the direction, as Dr. Avis said, a more perfect union. But in saying all of that, one of the things that I do kind of count it all joy around is that Black people, we are community people, right? We create villages, we create community. And so being able to be a part of a community that I've created where I'm able to talk with an audience of people several times a week and give them a basic formula that information plus engagement equals power. and what that looks like. Not only just people being outside in the streets protesting, but as Dr. Ava said, you also then have to have people that are involved in being the liaison, being advocates, people that are lobbying for change, people who are actually making the decision, like a Cori Bush out of Ferguson, to say that I am going to make the connection from activist to legislator to actually be able to take the experiences that she's had and actually create policy that's going to be helping to lift the folks that are ordinarily oppressed when we look at times like these.
Well, ladies, I want to thank you both for being on the program and sharing such important insights. Certainly have a lot more to discuss, and we'll be having you back on again because there's a political debate coming up next week. So I'd like both of you to be there front and center to go through it play by play the day after the debate, which takes place on the 29th. And then we'll talk about it the day afterwards. But today, we want to send a shout out to Breonna Taylor's family. Let her know that we're praying for. Let Breonna's family know that we're praying for them as they go through this, and to also reiterate to protest, but do it peacefully. Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver, Erica Savage Wilson, thank you both so much, and thank you for being leaders and reaching out to serve through your leadership. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Callie. Appreciate you.
We're coming back with much more after the break. And welcome back. I want to thank all of the guests who appeared on tonight's program. Certainly, there's a lot going on in this world right now that we're concerned about. As we move forward, my final word is this. In the book of Micah 6:8, scripture says, "What is good and what does the Lord require of you?" Well, it is to be just and to love. In other words, diligently practice kindness and compassion and to walk humbly with your God. We must have justice in America and seek it peacefully, but righteously. Hopefully you've been righted, ignited, and united to keep spreading not fear, not hatred, not retaliation, but love, freedom, peace, and justice. Good night.
Please come and give us forgiveness. Well, it's just too little you know we need it now. There's too little in times like these. Do you ever wonder, could it be we need a savior? Oh, in times like these, my God, could it be we need a savior? Could it be, oh my God, could it be we Lord, we need a savior.